That's the same.
That's what I was doing. Good evening. I call this Iowa City Community School Board meeting on Tuesday, February 25th, 2020 to order. My name is Janet Godwin, and I want to thank those in the audience for joining us tonight. I'll start by introducing those at the table with me. To my right, Superintendent Steve Murley, Directors Lisa Williams, Paul Ressler, Sean Eystone. To my left, Ruthina Malone, J.P. Clausen, Charlie Eastham, and Kim Colvin, Recording Secretary. The public is reminded that if they wish to speak, they need to complete a speaker form found at the table in the lobby and turn it in. During community comment, persons may speak to the board about topics relevant to the district. All community comment directed at non-agenda items and agenda items shall take place at the beginning of the meeting during the community comment section of the agenda. Before we begin tonight's meeting, the board would like to send our deepest condolences to the Crawford family, the City High family, and our entire district over the loss of City High senior Nolan Crawford. We are heartbroken and are here to provide any and all support needed during this terrible time. So, with that, we will move into our agenda. We'll start with community comment. We have one speaker, Cynthia Uka.
Cynthia Uka, 201 East 9th Street, Coralville, Iowa. There seems to be concern about the working environment at Lucas, high job turnover, and accusations of racial discrimination. I am here to give you an insider's perspective, my personal view, on the culture and climate at Lucas. Keep in mind, this is my personal perspective. I just couldn't sit back and allow the media to portray Lucas in a negative way. Lucas is an outstanding elementary school. Our parents and students are wonderful. Our staff is dedicated and committed to meeting the needs of students, and I see firsthand how they go above and beyond the call of duty. As a resource teacher, I have a unique opportunity to randomly go into classrooms throughout the day, 5 days a week. I see teachers, administrators, students interacting and learning. I see conflicts and how they're resolved. I'm not saying Lucas is perfect. I'm saying the Lucas environment is one in which teachers are passionate about what they're teaching and they genuinely care about the students. High job turnover. High job turnover doesn't always equate to dissatisfaction. Administrators retire, they move to different states, they move because their students live in a certain residential area. Do you think people at your place of employment move just because they're dissatisfied or because they feel they're being discriminated against? Community members, including the Lucas Racial Climate Committee, they're very outspoken. I attended a meeting last week and was shocked when I didn't see any minorities in the group. If there are so many issues and concerns regarding race, I wanted to know where are the minority parents? They're capable of speaking for themselves. We're capable of speaking for ourselves. Why didn't they come to Lucas or ask staff members? I've been there for years. You know, if you think there are issues or concerns, I would think the first step would be come to Lucas, ask to find out, you know, how you feel. I'm not saying discrimination doesn't exist. And I'm not saying that the committee has any bad intent. I just don't agree with their findings and I don't agree with their views. I don't see how you can draw conclusions when you don't spend time in the school for a significant amount of time during the school day. Once again, I want to thank you for giving me an opportunity to let you see Lucas from an insider's perspective and through my view. Lucas is an amazing community, and I just wanted to make sure that was reflected. Thank you for giving me an opportunity to share my experience through Lucas's lens. Thank you.
Thank you, Cynthia. We'll move on to our agenda approval. Is there a motion to approve our agenda tonight?
So moved. Second.
Kim, ready to vote?
Online voting is open. All votes have been cast and the motion carries with all directors voting in favor.
Thank you, Kim. Next up is our consent agenda. I'm not sure who reviewed bills this period.
Lisa and I did.
Great. Comments?
had some good questions. She can address those, but they look good to me.
Yeah, I had several questions regarding some of the payments we had. One, it was just a large number of criminal background checks, I believe over $7,000. And so I was just curious if that was for 1 month. And the answer I did get back, basically it was for January, just because we had a lot of new staff, some rechecks that had to be done, as well as we rented a forklift, and that's needed on the front end and back end when we move out of the high V storage space. And we also paid to repair the Garner overhead, I guess, dock door that was damaged. And so those were just a couple of things that stood out to me that I wanted more direct questions on, answers.
I had a couple of comments on items 6 and 9, just comments, or,
Yeah.
So,
I'm sorry, 6 and 8. Okay.
so we'll pull those items 6 and 8 from consent. Are there other consent agenda items directors would like to pull?
Number 5, open enrollment packet.
And 12.
6, 8, 5, and 12. Okey doke. I'll entertain a motion to approve consent agenda minus items 5, 6, 8, and 12. Thank you.
I move that we approve the agenda minus those pulled consent agenda items.
Did you say 8 or 9?
8, I'm sorry, Paul.
Yeah.
Second.
So-
Kim, ready to vote? You seconded it, right, Paul? Yeah. We're ready to vote.
Online voting is open. All votes have been cast, and the motion carries with all directors voting in favor.
Thank you. Item 5.
I just wanted to point out that there will be a correction under the 2021 listed students who are open enrolling into the district. There's 3 students listed where their resident district is West High, and the Iowa City school that they'll be attending is also West High, and that's just a typo. Resident district is actually Highland. So I just wanted that noted.
Okay, thank you. Is there a motion to approve item 5 with that modification?
I move that we approve item 5 with that correction.
Second.
I think it was JP. Kim, we're ready to vote?
Online voting is open. All votes have been cast, and the motion carries with all directors voting in favor.
Thank you. Item 6, Charlie.
I just wanted to note that I'm happy to see this item on the agenda. I've been in contact with a few parents over the last few weeks who have kids in the district that have dyslexia, and they're very interested in this particular change in the way we're providing reading instruction, I think, in the district. So I really commend the staff for making this change. And I would move approval of item 6 from the consent item agenda.
Is there a second?
Second.
Kim, ready to vote?
Online voting is open. All votes have been cast, and the motion carries with all directors voting in favor.
Thank you. Item 8.
And similarly, I think this is a really great step for us to be taking to join or have a staff member join the Harvard's Strategic Data Project. I think this is very much in keeping with our comprehensive diversity, equity, and inclusion plan, and that we want to be data-informed, evidence-driven, and inclusive in our decisions and policy-making in pursuit of equity in the district. I think this will help us a good deal in that effort. I do notice that the staff members will be working out a focus issue as part of this overall project, and I'm particularly interested in having some kind of participation by some groups like the Equity Committee and perhaps a board member or two in that effort, although I'm not quite sure that's appropriate from the superintendent's standpoint.
And as we get, move that over here, as we get into that process, Adam's going to be helping us champion that work, and we'll certainly take that into consideration and determine how best to involve people in that work moving forward.
Okay, thank you. And so I'll move approval of item 8, please.
We'll wait for a second, and then I just had a Second. question. So what's going to happen with the data? Who will own it?
Yes, so this partnership is actually it's really focused on the staff development side of things. So all of the data stays internal to the district. The Harvard SDP staff are working with us, with our district, to develop our capacity to use and analyze the data, but they're not actually working with the data. We don't send it anywhere. Mostly this data resides within Power School.
Okay, great.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, Kim, we're ready to vote.
Online voting is open. All votes have been cast, and the motion carries with all directors voting in favor.
Thank you, Kim. Item 12, Lisa.
Thanks. I just wanted to voice a little bit of disappointment that we're going as far away as Kansas City for the engaging of Compass Resolution on this. And it's by no means anything wrong with her qualifications. She's extremely qualified to do this, and I'm sure we're going to have a great result. But in terms of money, I'm going to be looking at the bills. What are we going to charge for her travel, hotel rooms, meal costs? Is she charging us hourly, even at a travel rate for her travel time in addition to mileage? We have exceptional attorneys in the corridor, in Cedar Rapids, in Davenport, and I just wanted to voice a little bit of concern that we are going so far outside the district to obtain counsel on this, and the impact that that's going to have on our costs. And I just want us to keep that at the back of our mind going forward. And with that, I would move to approve item 12.
Thanks. Is there a second? Thanks, Charlie. Any further conversation, discussion?
Can anybody speak to that maybe a little bit? I was just wondering if anybody could speak to that point about why so far away.
I would, go ahead, Paul.
I don't have a follow-up to that. I want to follow up to some of this other stuff she said. So if you have an answer, go ahead.
Yeah, there was a review process in terms of seeking counsel or folks who had the experience to do these kinds of reviews. There was a process for, I guess, getting nominations, for asking through various school board type networks, and the candidates that were presented and the top candidates that presented and were interviewed were folks from outside the state of Iowa. So there was a search process. I know that there was an opportunity to have folks from within the state kind of be identified as candidates, and there didn't manifest in terms of the decision process. So in terms of the fees, obviously this is not to exceed $15,000. Yes, travel expenses will be in addition to that, and we'll just need to be very cognizant about being very efficient throughout the process.
So this is just the fees and not the travel and
I think
extra fee?
travel expenses are in addition to
In addition to the
15,000. I'm maybe not reading that correctly. I think the fees are going to be in addition to the 15,000. I think the 15,000 is not to exceed 15,000 for the actual review activity and the report and travel expenses. So there'll be mileage, there'll be some, I'm sure, nights spent in Iowa City. I think the goal is to be as efficient in this process as possible so that we are not incurring multiple travel days and nights spent. There is a sense of urgency of moving through this process in a methodical, timely way too. So not to anticipate this being a very long, drawn-out process. So very, very good points around expense management.
I was just going to point out, I'll probably be in the minority here, but I'm going to vote against this contract. A couple reasons. Well, in addition to not knowing that if the fees are $15,000 plus the travel or not, I mean, that seems like a lot, especially when we're struggling with some other issues in the district that could pay for some help with. I'm not saying that it's not necessarily needed, but I also think it's unfortunate that we've got to the point where we've had to bring in someone from the outside when we have the staff here that we would hope that would be able to do something like this. So I just wanted to put that out there.
Any further discussion? We have a motion and a second. Kim, we're ready to vote.
Online voting is open. All votes have been cast, and the motion carries with Directors Godwin, Clausen, Malone, Eystone, Eastham, and Williams voting yea, and Director Ressler voting nay.
Thank you. Next, move into public hearings. First up is Lemony Elementary School addition and renovation project.
Now is the time and place for the public hearing on the proposed plans and specifications for the 2020 Lemmy Elementary School addition and renovation project. The Board of Directors set the date for this public hearing on February 11th, 2020. Notice of public hearing was published in the Iowa City Press Citizen on February 12th, 2020. The district will receive bids on this project at 2 p.m. on March 12th, 2020 at the Facilities Management Office located at 1137 South Riverside Drive, Iowa City, Iowa 52246. Notice to contractors was published as required by law in multiple statewide plan rooms and on the Iowa City Community School District website on February 12th, 2020. Are there any questions from the board? Are there any questions from the public?
Okay, thank you. We'll move on to the public hearing on City High Bates Field Lighting Project.
Now is the time and place for the public hearing on the proposed plans and specifications for the City High Bates Field Lighting Project. The Board of Directors set the date for this public hearing on January 14th, 2020. Notice of public hearing was published in the Iowa City Press Citizen on January 15th, 2020. The district will receive bids on this project at 2 p.m. on March 12th, 2020 at the Facilities Management Office located at 1137 South Riverside Drive, Iowa City, Iowa 52246. Notice to contractors was published as required by law in multiple statewide plan rooms and on the Iowa City Community School District website on January 15th, 2020. Are there any questions from the board? Are there any questions from the public?
Thank you. Next up is Weber Elementary Kitchen Remodel.
Now is the time and place for the public hearing on the proposed plans and specifications for the Weber Elementary Kitchen Remodel Project. The Board of Directors set the date for this public hearing on January 28th, 2020. Notice of public hearing was published in the Iowa City Press Citizen on January 29th, 2020. The district will receive bids on this project at 2 p.m. on February 27th, 2020 at the Facilities Management Office located at 1137 South Riverside Drive, Iowa City, Iowa 52246. Notice to contractors was published as required by law in multiple statewide plan rooms and on the Iowa City Community School District website on January 29th, 2020. Are there any questions from the board? Are there any questions from the public?
Thanks, Sean. We'll next move into policy review. Ruthina, update on P&G work.
Sure. We are still diligently working through the 400 series, but we have made significant movement. Our next meeting will be Tuesday, this coming Tuesday, and I'm very hopeful that maybe we will be able to finish the 400s on Tuesday, but there's been really great discussions because the 400s deal with our employee groups. So we want to make sure that any policy changes that we are making make sense and encompasses the agreements that we currently have with them. So I think we've been working really hard to make sure that we have that reflected. So when we bring that back to the full board, I think we can have good conversations about some of the recommendations we're making around those policies.
Do you have a sense of sort of the timing for when that would come back to the board? Are we thinking in the April timeframe
Well,
probably?
and this is something that the full board, if they decide they want something different, we were going to update all of the series and bring the whole packet versus pieces.
One at a time, okay.
Yes. So my hope, maybe late summer,
Okay, all right.
just because with our schedules and everything, it's just kind of hard.
Yeah, it's a lot of work.
Yep.
So I was just checking in on the intent there. So sort of end of summer, that's good. And thanks for all the work the committee's doing. I know it is a lot of detailed work.
It would be nice to have them done for the next school year.
Yeah, I mean, we're hopeful, and they can tell you that I throw out all types of meeting suggestions, but it's just a matter of, I recognize that we have some hardworking board members and staff that sits on P&G, so we're just trying to be respectful of their time, but also aware that this is important to try and get this done before the next school year.
Okay. Thank you, Ruthina. Anything else from directors on our policy and governance update? Hearing none, portrait of a graduate follow-up. I think the first meeting was yesterday. How did it go? I'm curious how the process played out and what are next steps and observations from the team.
I'll start with observations. I was very encouraged to see the large number of students that signed up to be involved with the team, and the amount of detailed feedback that they had on a lot of the things that we were discussing last night. They're very invested, since this directly impacts what we create for their experience in our district. So I was very happy to hear from so many of them that shared throughout the night on different points as we were talking through the project.
Yeah, I would echo that about the students. It was, one, we have great students, and they're willing to speak up in front of a big group of strangers, and they had great things to say. I mean, I just think having their voice, and literally it was central because they set the students in the middle of the group last night. These are the people who are going to be affected, and they're the ones who kind of understand, does what we're doing make sense for them right now? And do they feel a value in what we're providing? And so that was great to hear from them. I'm hoping, there were some students that weren't there, so I hope in the future, I hope the rest of the students come in and we start to hear more of their voices. And I was encouraged by the turnout. I really appreciated that, and I'm looking forward to kind of moving ahead and keeping the work going.
And I don't know if we call him our moderator, our leader.
Facilitator.
He was excellent. I mean, I think that he is the right guy to do this, and he brought a really, I thought, positive energy to the room, but also kept us on track. And so I was really encouraged, not knowing too much about Bartell before you get into the process, what's it going to look like. So far, so good. I was really impressed with him.
What did you do?
So we, they had us grouped at tables, assigned seating. And so at our tables, we would, last night was just an introduction to their process and kind of a global overview of how the world has changed, what the workforce is looking like. Certainly talking about climate as a health issue was a central message.
They put up a variety of scenarios. One, they said, like, the rapid pace of technology development and how quickly things are moving, and then the facilitator would have a 5-minute discussion about it and put up some discussion topics, and then you would discuss it at your table, and no one was with somebody, like, they didn't have two teachers together. It's all different stakeholders. And then after your table discussion, we would vote online about whether or not we thought that was
Interesting,
but not
important,
yeah,
or critical.
Cool.
And
That's
so,
good.
So it's a way for them to rank how important we all think these issues were, and I suspect they're going to take that data back and then in a month crunch it back out at us and say, this is what the group thought was critical, these three things.
And I just had a side conversation with him because my biggest question was, because I didn't know what to expect from this group coming in. And I was just like, so have you worked with the community similar to Iowa City? I mean, meaning that, we have some highly engaged parents and students. And I was very happy to hear that he has worked with other groups that sort of look like Iowa City. So it's not that all of a sudden he has our large district that he's never encountered similar demographics or experiences. So I think that the information that at the end, I'm very hopeful that we as a board will get some really useful information that helps us develop our vision and mission going forward.
My one concern about the process is kind of the way that each issue was framed. They were all framed as important, and that people would just say critical, like everything is critical.
Everything's the number one priority,
Yeah.
and that's going to be the real magic, is trying to figure out how to prioritize. It's tough.
So I tried to
Yeah.
individually prioritize, and I hope other people did as well, because there were 14 things we voted on. They can't all be critical.
Yeah, it's really hard. That's really hard. So is any homework or anything between now and the next meeting?
We do have homework. We have an article we have to read before the next meeting.
Can you share it with the rest of us?
Yes,
It'd
we will be.
interesting. Yeah, that's
So maybe
awesome.
just a couple quick follow-ups. So first of all, if you weren't there last night, we have about 150 people invited. So it's a very large group. Just for people in the audience, from that standpoint, we've got students, we've got former students So graduates of the district who are back. We've got parents, we have board members, we have district level leaders, building level leaders, teachers, support staff. We have representatives from our municipal leaders in our 5 municipalities. We have the business community, social services, the faith community, higher ed, and then just interested community members who are present at the table. So we've got a great cross-section of our community. However, it's not everybody who lives in town. So one of the things that I did today was I had some follow-up conversation with our facilitator about given the content that you shared, is it possible for us to post it on our website so that other people who weren't present can see it? They asked some questions. I told them we have a Qualtrics guru in the house. Would it be possible for us to actually replicate the questions that they ask and ask the community? We won't cross-pollinate with the group. We want to make sure that those people that are present have the opportunity to have their voices heard, but can we hear from others outside the community who might also want to share their ranking of whether or not it's interesting or critical? And so he's very open to that, so I'm going to work with Kristen and see what we can do about putting some of that same content up so that people can see it and kind of participate vicariously. And then they left us with an open-ended question at the end about those things that we thought were important moving forward. I think that's another great opportunity for us as part of that process to reach out to people who aren't sitting at the table and get their input on it too. We can distill that information, we can share it with the participants, and we can share it with Battelle, and then hopefully that'll help us round out the conversation and make sure that we're getting input from other community members who couldn't have participated for a variety of reasons.
That's cool. Thank you.
I just want to say that I talked to a friend who's on the committee today and asked them what their reaction was, and they said they actually had fun.
Wow, that's good. That's good.
I did kind of chuckle, Steve, at your list of former students only having 2 on there when technically there's probably a handful of former students in the other groups.
Oh, I'm
as
sure there
well.
are.
So,
We've got a lot of people that fit more than one label on there. It's what they signed up as is who they're representing. So again, we're really excited. We actually had more applicants than we had seats, so that was kind of nice from that standpoint to look at. Again, I think we're going to get a great cross section perspective from our community as we go through it.
Cool. So we'll have one of these updates after every one of these.
Yes, you will. And
designs.
actually, he was on the road, so I didn't get the materials until later this afternoon. So I'll be sending those out to everybody, and then I'll be working with Kristen to get those posted on the website so that the rest of the community has access to them also.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you all for sitting on the committee. Really, really appreciate your time on that. It means a lot. Moving on to our 2020-2021 certified budget. Leslie?
Yes. You have kind of a snapshot of where we are right now in the process. If you recall, at the end of January, we laid out some assumptions for you, a timeline of when the next steps would be. And we were hopeful that at this presentation, we might have state supplemental assistance determined, and we don't. So we're kind of in a holding pattern here. I have laid out a comparison that shows the 1.5% that we talked about in January, as well as the 2.1 and the 2.5% scenarios that are in each one of the chambers right now, waiting to be discussed. I would like to thank Lisa for finding a transposition error in the instructional support program line for the 2.1%. The 8,847,204 amount should be 8,487,204. So pulling those numbers over from the aid and levy worksheet, I transposed, so I apologize for that. But we'll get those finalized. But it's an attempt to try to show you what the tax levy would look like under those various scenarios. It doesn't change very much for us, and we'll be pretty much in line with where we were last year in terms of that rate under any one of the scenarios. So I just remind you that this certified budget process that culminates on April 14th for certification by the 15th, sets the tax rate and sets this overall budget authority. It doesn't set any of the programming levels or any program budgets or anything of that nature. So entertain any questions that you might have as to what's here.
I have a quick question on the Senate file 2164 that the governor signed today, the transportation one. Will that, I would assume we fall in the group that the tax rate will go down for? Is that how that?
I have not seen the final numbers of that analysis, Paul.
I've only seen the overview also, and I think, to be honest with you, it has very little impact on us. This is I think, a Western Dubuque type of issue. So when you look at transportation equity across the state, those districts that bear a disproportionate burden in transporting their kids are the ones who are going to benefit most significantly from us. So it's unlikely to have a very significant impact on us, and I haven't seen the final numbers on it yet either. But I will say, I was contacted by the media today, and I did tell them that although it's not a significant impact on us as a district, from a philosophical perspective, as a district, we support the concept of equity and funding. So I indicated that we support the change in the transportation formula so that it is equitable for all districts, recognizing that that should be applied across the budgeting processes for the state, and those would have some positive impacts on us as a district.
Yeah, for sure.
Other questions or comments for Les?
I had a question on the instructional support program number, so you answered it.
Okay.
It seemed weird that it went up and then down again.
No, that's good. Good catches. Thank you, Les. We'll keep our eyes on this as we move through the process. Appreciate the update tonight. Next up is Lisa with a presentation on some seclusion and restraint information.
Okay, good evening. I am presenting tonight to provide an update on where we are on restraint and seclusion. It's been a little while since I reported about this publicly anyway. And part of the reason for that is because, and you'll see on my first slide here, the current Chapter 103 of the Iowa Administrative Code is under revision, and it has been for a while. It's been quite a process of revision and then go out for public comment, come back and revise it, which the process is set up for. That's what's supposed to happen. And I believe even in March, the State Board of Education will vote on the current revision of those changes. So what I'm sharing with you tonight is relative to the current Chapter 103 requirements, reporting, all the parameters that we have been governed by. So just that clarification. I've had a lot of questions about comments about was my presentation tonight actually covering changes that were going to be made? No, they're not made yet. If and when we need to report out on changes that have been made, we'll come back with that at the time when things are finalized. So, so I just wanted to let you know that. So, of course, restraint and seclusion procedures and reporting procedures with regard to restraint and seclusion are governed by Chapter 103 of the Iowa Administrative Code. It establishes requirements for physical restraint, confinement, and detention. And it's really under the heading of corporal punishment and is an exception to the definition of corporal punishment. And, corporal punishment means intentional physical punishment. That is not what we're talking about. In fact, we're not even talking about punishment. We're talking about protective procedures. So a lot of people don't understand that's where it's hidden in the code, kind of, and it doesn't seem like a logical place to me because of the reason that we even would need to employ these procedures to begin with. So I did attach the actual Chapter 103, and I put some summary points in here, but that's not to be a substitution for the actual Chapter 103, and that's why I posted it up too. So to have a more complete narrative of what that code actually says, you can refer to the actual legislation which is uploaded. So Chapter 103 is intended to really define reasonable and necessary force and the circumstances under which we could use that force in order to accomplish some things in schools. It was written in 2008, so that's been quite a while ago. And really spells out that employees are not prohibited from doing certain things. And the reasonable necessary force to accomplish those things in that list is actually what it says in the code, including protection of property, self-defense or defense of others, preventing a student from self-infliction of harm, protecting the safety. So you can see that these are general terms that have been used in the specifically that only the use of reasonable and necessary force and using incidental, minor, or reasonable physical contact to maintain order and control are the things that are probably most specific there. Specifically, though, I do want to talk about the definition of what a seclusion or physical confinement and detention actually are. Physical confinement and detention means confinement of a student in a timeout room or some other enclosure, whether within or outside a classroom from which the student's egress is restricted. So the egress is restricted is the really important part of that. And in terms of our guidance for staff reporting, we get lots and lots of questions all the time, which I think is a good sign because people are really attending to the reporting then of, I had this certain situation happen, would that be reportable? Did I restrict egress? Was it in an enclosure? And uniformly, our answer to those questions is if you feel that egress was restricted, you should report it. And, I think that deserves some explanation because sometimes I get a question back of, well, I didn't want, there to be a report if it's not supposed to be reported. Most people understand that this is high stakes information, that changes in programming could be made based on this, follow-up is always provided, and, so they want to be right. But our take on that actually is that the primary reason for this information, the reason that we look at it and keep it, is number one, to report to parents that something happened. And the reporting to parents is a requirement of Chapter 103. In my opinion, and the way that we have been advising people is that if you're not sure, and we have over-reported to a parent, the potential for harm is less than if we under-report to parents. That if it really was an event that a parent needed to know about and we didn't formally report with this level of detail, that's not sufficient. Something happened, and so I would rather have a parent receive a report that maybe we didn't legally, by the letter of the law, ever have to submit, but now they're armed with more information to advocate for their child. So also for student problem solving, we use this information on multiple levels, but probably the most important level is to adjust and monitor what is happening for the student and making sure that the services for the student are meeting the student's needs. And that's one way we can tell, if are they continuing to have events happen. Because at the point of a crisis, something has gone wrong. Something hasn't worked quite the way we wanted it to, or, is the frequency of those crises actually reducing? Do we feel like we've got reduction-oriented procedures in place? Are there other supports that we need to provide? So for both of those reasons, I would rather have people report rather than not report. So that's just one thing to keep in mind.
I have a quick question.
Yes.
In the situation of a room clear where then the student is left alone in the room and egress is restricted at that point, does that trigger a physical confinement and detention, or does the enclosure have to be separate and distinct from the classroom?
That is a great question. What you have described, if we operated a room clear and then we blocked egress, that is reported. It should be reported under the current parameters. It would be and is often reported. So, yes, whether or not, no matter where it is, we had made a promise to remove all of our temporary and portable enclosures that we had previously used for seclusion, and we have done that. We did it on the specified timeline. We have other areas, and actually many, probably dozens of areas in every single building that really meet this description. In fact, we have areas outside of a building, every building, that meet this description. And one of the examples I've used, because this really happened to me once, over time, is that I have been involved in a case where we restricted egress from a playground because a student was running home from the playground. And so we didn't let the student leave the playground because that was super problematic. The student would get home and more hazardous behavior would develop. So we reported every single one of those because we restricted egress. We blocked the student from leaving. And even though in that case the enclosure was a huge playground area, most playground areas are fenced or at least partially fenced. But even if it wouldn't have been, and we would have just had adults posted at different places, we have restricted that student's egress. So again, are there specific parameters behind exactly when you have to report? No. And because of that, if we are in question, I say if in doubt, fill it out. If you think it's crossing your mind that I really think maybe this should be reported, then do it. Because the result of that is that parents are going to get more information rather than less. So yes. Other questions about the restricting egress? Okay, so you can see that any space used for this purpose would have to meet certain requirements, and they are somewhat vague. There aren't square footage requirements in there. The specifications of whether or not walls have to be padded, that kind of thing, they're not very specific right now.
Lisa, maybe don't go into a lot of detail on this, but maybe give folks an idea of the magnitude of the changes that they're talking about making to the code.
My understanding is the current revision would completely redefine seclusion.
And have more specifics about
It would be
areas.
literally about what space it is in.
Okay.
Yes. The question of whether or not to report completely depends on what space the student was secluded into.
Down to
That's
square
my
feet.
understanding. Sorry.
Down to square feet.
Square feet, yeah, and being
Yes.
attached part of the building and reporting requirements, I think, as well.
Yes, reporting and follow-up. There have always been some requirements for follow-up and to include some of those details within the report, but the parameters will be much more specific in the new revision. That is my current understanding of where it is, but yes, generally, it would be more specific. Okay, so we have included year-end numbers of the actual number of instances of restraint and seclusion that have happened during the 2017, 18, and 18-19 school years. What we have seen right at the moment is that as our enrollment is increasing, our instances have decreased. This is just a 2-year period of time. The reason that I started this report with the 2017-18 school year is because that's when electronic reporting started. And that is real-time and really accurate information. I'm not saying that information before that was inaccurate or anything like that. I'm just saying that it stands to reason that when people have a very reliable way to immediately enter reports, we'll talk about this in a minute, but increase the training for people entering reports, that we know for sure people were adequately and extensively trained during these periods of time, and going forward, we can ensure that they will be.
So Lisa, can
Yes.
you make any comments about whether the rate of incidents in this district is similar, different than other districts in the state?
I really don't have information to be able to make that assumption at all. I just don't have information from other districts about their year-end numbers. I'm sorry.
Who do we report this to?
We actually don't report these numbers out, except for every 3 years we report to OCR
Okay.
for the civil rights data collection process.
Is that just us, or is that every school district?
That is every school district.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Is that data then disaggregated when we report that out?
It is disaggregated and reported out. However, my understanding of that report is that procedures have been applied to those numbers to protect privacy. So anytime we're reporting student information, especially sensitive, we have to make sure that it's not potentially identifiable. And that limits our ability to report at some level, and also OCR's ability to report out publicly. So we have used, and this is one of the things I'll talk about next, but in counting, it sounds like an easy question of how many restraints and seclusions were there during a certain period of time. It's actually not an easy answer, because embedded within a certain report, we may have multiple instances that we're counting. In fact, this information reflects that, because that is OCR's guidance of how they want the civil rights data collection reported. And so we felt like that was a standard way to be able to report accurately and compare information over time. That they have advised us that there could be multiple instances within one report. And so we've counted both years that way. So that's some of what I wanted to make sure as we look at numbers, that people understand that these are not cohort groups. Various years represent different students. We have students coming and going all the time. If, a student with extensive needs comes or goes, that could, affect that year significantly. We can't, I guess, determine specific student improvement, but that's not appropriate use of these particular numbers. We have other processes under which we are monitoring specific student improvement. We have increasing enrollment, so the number of students compared to our total enrollment. Those numbers do not represent a number of students. They represent a number of instances. So that's just something to keep in mind. I think it's kind of confusing that when we have total number and then certified enrollment, we may be trying to figure out a percentage. That is not a calculation that can be made from these numbers. Clarification and guidance on reporting changes over time, and I've been working in some way or another, interacting with these procedures and these numbers for the entire time, really, that Chapter 103 has been in existence, and I can tell you that I've heard various kind of iterations of guidance on when to report. So again, we have to determine, when guidance changes or when it's not very specific. We have to determine what is in the best interest of our own students. And again, I'm back to, it is in the best interest of our own students for their parents to be, well informed. So even though, and I just, again, heard another was in a legal session where something was mentioned, and I was thinking, we currently do report that. And the speaker was saying this is not a reportable under Chapter 103 currently. And then I, went back to, but it is in the student's best interest for their parent to be well informed. So it's just something to know when you look at the numbers. Single crisis events often result in multiple instances. And then these totals represent both restraint and seclusion. Sometimes I find that people are kind of making an assumption that this is specifically tied to the number of times that we've enacted a procedure for seclusion, and that is not the case. These are both restraints and seclusions. And actually, most of the definition within Chapter 103 is regarding seclusion and not restraint. So we actually have a lot more questions about restraint than we do about seclusion. And again, I say, if in doubt, fill it out. If there was an incident that you feel like you may have been restraining a student, inform their parent, because then they know something happened with their child and they can be part of the process to figure out what to do going forward. So, you know, a percentage of those numbers are actually just restraints. Not just restraints, but restraints, and did not involve seclusion. Any questions about that much as I transition out of that part? I think that's a lot already. We've found that the key to improvement and to improving what we're really trying to improve mostly, which is our services to students, is that set of checks and balances, that we have a way to provide immediate, ongoing monitoring and immediate adjustment. And if we have an issue with something going wrong somewhere, how are we catching that and getting the right resources and problem solving to that problem or that issue? And so that's what we have tried to accomplish with setting up all of our procedures around these two things. So we did have to submit a corrective action plan with our state complaint, and the things I have listed here were items that we wrote into our corrective action plan, so then therefore they were required, meaning that we committed to them. I actually don't even know really how long we would be committed, but we have no intention of abandoning any of these strategies because we embedded the things that we felt like were just good for kids, good for our system, good for parents, good for our staff, and so we would have no reason to go away from any of them. Electronic reporting, I already mentioned, gives us a chance to look at information real time and respond to it. And then a monthly building level review of reports is required. Every single building in the district has a review of all of their restraint and seclusion reports for the month, every month. And those meetings are documented. The notes they take and responses that they devise are documented. And then based on that information, we have a district level review of reports. So we review all reports in the district every month. And so the purpose for that is to be able to provide whatever kind of support that a case might need. Sometimes we allocate additional resources. Sometimes they just need expertise. So we also had our Chapter 103 training for all instructional staff, QBS safety care refreshers at each building. We already had, we formerly used CPI. We went to QBS safety care just because we felt like that was a much more intensive training process. The requirements for safety care training are much more stringent than CPI, and we felt like therefore it was better training. The verbal de-escalation is much more specific and helpful for staff who have to actually implement it. If you try to verbally de-escalate an escalated student and you haven't had enough training to be able to do that, you could make the problem worse accidentally. So that part of the training in QBS is just much more robust, and that was really a big driver behind that decision. PBIS training in all buildings, additional FTE for challenge and behavior team. Annual notice, that means posted on our website to parents, and then increased training for reporting.
Sorry, Lisa, before you leave that slide, you go back up to the monthly building and district level reports. Are those reports disaggregated data? Restraint and seclusion, you know, of students of color, all students?
So the monthly building level review requires the building team to go through all of the reports. So it's not compiled and disaggregated as a group, although at the time that they review the reports, they would be needing to look for trends for some of the things that we might disaggregate if we were to do that. Does that answer your question? We also do that at the district level when all reports are, you know, noticing patterns in our subgroups, that kind of thing, I think is what you're referring to, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Right. So
So
you're
yes.
saying that the report itself would not show me, if I was looking at it, what percentage of students who were restrained or secluded were black, Latinx, white.
That's
Is that
correct.
right? That is correct. It
That
would
is
not be
correct.
in there, right?
Right,
Thank you.
right. Other questions about that part? So above and beyond, you know, we're never striving just to do only what's required. So we've continued to work on our processes, our supports, our resources available to make sure that we're, you know, getting at solutions for students. I'm not going to read through the entire slide, but you know, I often get asked what are we doing, you know, about the restraint seclusion issue. The answer is a lot. We are very active around the entire umbrella of social, emotional, behavioral health services. And within that, some very specific things that we have done that help students with more extreme needs. Clear down to core supports in every classroom, and that's what the PBIS training is about. Some things to note, we have a special education behavior coach. I've gotten a lot, that's a new position this year, and I've gotten really positive feedback. That's a person who just goes in and works with our Strat 2 BD certified teachers and helps them set up processes in their classroom, helps get things in place for implementation of plans. And that's, I guess that might be one point that I'd like to make is that, you know, at the end of the day, we have a lot of really great people who are, they're coming to work every day and just pouring their heart and soul out for kids that have extensive needs. And we're a public school, and we don't choose our clientele, and we would never want to. We take every student, and we welcome them exactly as they are with all they have to offer. And so the people who are every day seeing the students right in front of them and working tirelessly to work through issues, assist students forward from wherever they are, and accepting them as they are and promoting their progress both at the same time, deserve all the credit for any progress that we've made. Because without that piece of it, it isn't going to matter what kind of plan we write. And these are people who are probably underappreciated. So, you know, I really just want to acknowledge that. We have a lot of caring people they're working hard for our kids, and they deserve to be able to hear that. So, we have also our student family advocates, school-based mental health services, suicide prevention and ACEs training, cultural proficiency and implicit bias. We've also had an increase in our use of restorative practices, use of training of restorative practices, use of training of training time for our teachers who serve the students who are most complex, our Strat 2 BD and Strat 2 ID teachers, they have a half day once a month now that we have focused professional learning for them. And we're weaving some of these concepts into that training. And mostly, that's it's a lonely job. Our people, our strategist too, people are, they're with kids all the time because their kids have a lot of needs. And to me, they don't get out much unless we plan that and plan for a support group, a supportive culture for them. And I think that, that feels strange to people at first when they start to come to these centralized meetings because they're literally meeting people they've never met before. But I think that is blossoming into a really good support for our teachers who deserve extra support. We also have the PBIS multi-tiered system of support, learning for secondary principles, climate and culture, social, emotional, behavioral health, learning for our elementary principals and IDS. So it's figuring out where are the touch points that we can weave it in all the time, and just help all of our staff understand more about the needs of students.
I'll just comment that I wish this stuff had been in place when I was that teacher, because it is a lonely job, and it's nice to have. I mean, this is a lot of this stuff. I don't want to comment on everything, but the amount of support that exists now that didn't used to exist is monumental.
Yeah. They deserve it.
Yeah, and thank you for speaking well about them, because
we have a lot of good people. So going forward, I want to, maybe we can expand just a little bit more, and I'm going to ask Amy and Matt to chime in here too, because the district level review they're actually involved in, and maybe they can comment on that process just a little bit. So we have a multi-level review, those checks and balances, where are all the points that we're going to be reviewing, revising, updating, circling around with people, supporting. So we've got the case level review. The frequency varies depending on the case. So I'm involved in an IEP case right now that meets every 2 weeks. The full IEP team meets every 2 weeks to review and update the student's progress. This is a student with extreme needs. He needs for us to meet every 2 weeks. So we just make that happen in his case. And there are other cases where I know people are meeting very frequently too. It's a time intensive, and the level of case deserves, and we have to carve out the time. So then we have the building level review, like I said, and that's a problem solving group in the building. And then we have the district level data review, and maybe that's where you guys can comment a little bit.
Yeah, Lisa shared with me that she wanted me to share a little bit about our process. I would just maybe take a step back and say that this is one of our highest priority areas that we work on in the district, and I appreciate Lisa's approach to this, the systems that we've put in place around every facet. If you just revisit the legislation, everything tonight that she's spoken to is right there. We've got an answer for it, a process or procedure for it. And I'd just like to elaborate on the district level review and the care in which we try to approach each of these individual cases. Like she shared, you have that individual review that's happening, whether we've put together Tier 3 plans for our general education students or behavior intervention plans for our special education students, that building level review that's happening. Sometimes the building might not have any of occurrences during the month, but their team is still supposed to get together and just note that on the paperwork so that they're in the habit of knowing that they need to come together every month. And then, of course, the district level review. We work with 3 key individuals, challenging behavior team members who are outstanding, who work on the behalf of our students that are the most vulnerable, the most at risk, the ones that we see the most intense behaviors out of. But they're the ones that go in and look at the individual cases that occur each month and then bring that up to the district level review. And they're at these meetings, and we spend about an hour and a half to 2 hours each month sitting with them. Lisa and I do, sometimes Matt, depending on if it's happening, where it's happening at. But in that approach, as we look at things, we're looking at and asking questions about, are we ensuring that those building level reviews are occurring each month? Are there any concerns with the reporting? Are the reports completely filled out? Do we know that our parents are being informed in that timely manner that Chapter 103 calls for? Are there any concerns of the description of the events leading up into the event? Are there concerns with the holds being used? Do we need to go back and reteach any of the holds that we see described? Are there more than 3 incidents in 1 month? We've written in our workout plan that if that's happening with our students that are identified or entitled individuals, that IEP meetings need to be held. And then most importantly, are there other resources or supports that we need to give back to those building teams? And then as we're having that discussion, we decide who's getting back to those building teams or those building principals. And it can either be one of our 3 challenging behavior team members or Lisa, myself, or Matt. So I'm really proud of our approach, the way that we are really trying to care for each of these individual students as well as the staff to making sure we're providing the best and most supportive environment. But ultimately, at the end of the day, that as we watch those students' progress monitoring, that we know that they're making improvements over time. So.
In addition to the case level, building level, district level review, if this is something that the board is interested in, we could also add that yearly board summary, like we've had tonight, too, because that's large scale data that I can pretty safely say we could always report out because of the size of the data set, that there isn't too much concern that it will become potentially identifiable because in a district this size, when we look at that year-end number. So if that's something you're interested in, you can talk about it and let us know.
Yeah, I personally would like to see that annual report. I think some of the information that you were sharing tonight, Lisa, around the work the team has been doing, the dedication and hard work of the team members, if nothing else, just an opportunity for the board to reflect on the work that we're doing with the student population and making sure that we're, with the care and focus that you are bringing to it. And I just think it's important for the board to have that information on an annual basis, and that annual data set would be helpful to look at too. So thank you for the information tonight and for the care that the team is putting forward every single day. I know that people are putting their hearts and souls into this work, and it really does make a difference. Other comments from directors?
I do appreciate your report and the work you're doing, Lisa. It's really fantastic. But I am concerned. Is any of this level review and level oversight specifically directed at making sure that we're not disproportionately looking at kids of color in the district?
We do talk about that, about the specific individuals that we, when we have the district level review, I'm assuming they are too in the building, but that is another thing that we can loop back around and talk about with principals again, because it's not a one and done. Here's how you do it, and then they're just going to go do it. It's constantly looping back. Remember, we're going to pay special attention to this. I think one of the biggest things that we need to do in order to, address exactly what you're talking about is plan proactive strategies, implicit bias training, our restorative practices. A lot of that is going to be in prevention. If we are using restraint and seclusion for the most protective reasons, really when there is an emergency underway and we don't have another choice, then it isn't going to matter who it is, we still won't have another choice. We are only doing it because it is the only choice. But the question that needs to be asked is, what are we doing way back before a crisis starts? What are the things that we're doing in order to make our environment more accommodating to differences in students, so that we're not getting into the place where we only have one choice? It is all about the proactive planning. Yes, we are putting a lot of time into making sure that our reactive strategies are in line with where they need to be and that they're going in the right direction. But the way out of it is the prevention. I just can't possibly overstate that for all students. And thinking about those, subgroup sensitive strategies that are going to make a difference to preventing it from happening. Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate that answer. I don't know, not this year, but looking over next year, I think it would be cool for the Ed Committee to maybe have some of the challenging behavior team and some of the folks that are doing the work on the ground kind of present to the board, and we can hear some of their stories, and so we get a better idea of how this is working on the ground. That might be, if you think that would be worthwhile.
I think that would be great. We have it's cross-departmental work going on. Obviously behavior and mental health type considerations are intricately entwined. And so there are several different people that would have a lot of really good information to be able to explain more about some of the solutions and what do we see as the gaps still. So I think that'd be great.
Great.
They'd be happy to.
Okay, great. So Steve, I'll put you in charge of that Ed Committee next year, sometime early in the fall.
It's a great idea. Thanks,
Great,
JP.
thanks.
Yeah, and in those discussions too, I think it helped me at least anyway, to talk about the things that you just described. We really need to look at what's happening to kids way before through the PBIS plan for them.
That and also, again, our social, emotional, behavioral health considerations are so intertwined with academic considerations too that it really is all one big picture. I mean, students don't come in neat little packages having one need or another. It's all related, and just our environment in school. What are we doing? How are we adjusting our academic demands? How are we adjusting our instruction? All of that is preventative. And one of the points that I probably haven't said and usually do say and want to say is that we get a lot of requests for numbers, and I understand the need for that, and that's part of why we're offering a report out to the board every year, because that's as long as they're numbers we can give, that's okay. When numbers are published or when we're even talking about them, presenting them in a meeting like this, it's easy when you're not personally involved to just see these as numbers.
Yeah.
We don't see these as just numbers. These are people.
Mm-hmm.
This information represents some of our precious students' most desperate times. And, we are committed to protecting privacy for individuals who could have a tendency to be exploited. When we give out numbers publicly, we don't know what's going to happen with what possible repercussions a student could suffer if it were potentially if it were identifiable, and we have wrongly given it out. So yes, we do protect our students in every way, and this is one of those ways that we're careful about. This is somebody's baby we're talking about. That's how I feel about my kids. So just being very sensitive to that. Families who, feel terrible that this is happening and don't want their child's worst moments paraded in front of public if it's not necessary. So I get that.
Thank you, Lisa. Appreciate the information tonight. A great deal. Look forward to continued conversations in Ed Committee, and thank you so much. Moving on to legislative update. Steve, you want to say a few words?
Well, Leslie stole some of the thunder there, that we don't have any supplemental state aid yet. It's hanging in limbo right now. I just had some conversation with our UEN lobbyist. No firm drop date yet, so we're still awaiting that.
What's the holdup? Like, do they say,
it may be a bargaining chip right now for other things that are moving to the legislature, which is one of the reasons, if you remember, that there's a requirement that they set it within 30 days of it being established by the governor, and that's to keep it from being held hostage to other issues that are out there. The concern is it may have gotten caught in that process. So we are eagerly awaiting that, as that obviously is an enormous impact on our budget.
Can you speak to the day on the Hill?
Yes, well, it looks like we're looking at Wednesday, March 11th right now as our date on the Hill. Margaret is trying to work that through with some of the other issues, and actually Lisa alluded to one of them that's moving through. We've got several student issues that are pieces of legislation that are moving along. The seclusion and restraint piece being one of them. The DE's work on Chapter 103, and they look like they'll be culminating around that time. So that'll be a good opportunity for us to be there and share our thoughts on that with the legislators.
And, you know, we've been asked by a few just community members, you know, how how do they find out about it, or how can they get involved in it? How can they join whoever's going to go, that kind of stuff? We're
Kristen and
working
I
through that now.
almost have the flyer ready to go. We've got the draft schedule out there. We're getting Margaret to confirm that. For those of you that are in Joe Bolcom's district, you can thank the senator. He's working on reserving room space for us at the Capitol. And so we'll have that flyer done shortly. As soon as we get the spaces confirmed and the times confirmed, we'll actually get that up on our website, and then we'll send it out to all the PTOs in the building so that they can push it out to their parent audiences. And we welcome students at the secondary level. We welcome staff members, parents, community members. We'll also reach out to ICAD. We've had great success bringing some of our business partners along in the past, and sometimes we get some of our higher ed partners to accompany us.
So with welcoming some of our secondary students, do we offer any type of transportation to help them get up there and back?
We've carpooled.
Okay.
So as we get a little bit further along and determine how many of them might be interested, frequently they convince their parents to come along with us, so that's always a plus.
That's not
And
possible.
then we'll arrange transportation based on how many we have that have interest.
That's good to know, especially for some directors that don't drive.
Anything else on the legislative process? If not, we'll go to agenda setting. We've got Ruthina reminded me on March 3rd, there's a P&G meeting, continuing the 400 series. We're with ya. Maybe we'll pound that out. On the 10th, we've got a board meeting. Consent agenda, presentation on annual enrollment and demographics report. That's really it from board meeting.
And I would just give you a caveat on the demographics report. Although I was joking today, their issue is not an app issue related to the caucus app problem that we had, but they do have an app issue problem, and they still do not have data uploaded. I've been literally checking daily. Oh, months.
Months.
Yeah, months.
Very frustrating. We were asked a lot where these data are, and
So we're hoping that they have it up soon. We've had to do some, we know what data we've uploaded to them. We don't know how they've cleaned it up, so we've had to use some of that data internally. For instance, Amy and I had to work out what we are pretty confident is our free and reduced lunch rate, because that is part of our elementary choice option. So we have an equity voluntary transfer piece, and that's predicated on our FRL numbers. And so our tech team, Austin in our tech team has been wonderful in helping us determine what we've uploaded to the DE so that we can try to reverse engineer it and calculate it by building. We hope that it is very, very close to accurate, because those are the numbers that we've used for that. So I continue to be aggressive at putting it on the calendar, but cautious about whether or not the DE is going to get their information ready to go.
so what happened? Well, we'll speculate
Yeah.
later on what happens if they don't get their act together. Okay.
Fall report for us.
Okay, so hopefully we'll have the annual enrollment and demographics report. Anything else that directors would like to see in the board meeting on the 10th? There is a work session that night as well, and our agenda is we'll hear from the Grant Wood Area Agency, getting an overview of programs and services. We'll start talking about our 2020-2021 budget and priorities. I think that's going to be a good conversation in terms of what we would like to see is prioritized for our budget next year. Start that conversation. We'll get an update on the costs for providing closed captioning. Thank you, Kristen, for that. And then we'll continue discussion on RAM, but this time at the secondary level. So that's a pretty full work session. I would like to get an update at some point, like what are our next steps after the Securely and Gaggle presentations? Just, I don't know if that's at a work session or is that a quick update at a board meeting, Matt? Just curious, what are we doing with that data we got a couple weeks ago?
Yeah, I mean, we could just call it a care assessment update, and we could do that during the regular board meeting, or if you wanted to have a larger conversation around it, we could do it at the work session. I think there is probably some conversation about steps to move forward or steps not to move forward, whichever avenue we decide to choose on that. But we do have the position posted, the care assessment coordinator. So that'd just be a couple quick things on that, but we could talk about it in either format.
I think, the board meeting itself on the 10th is so light, that timing is okay? We could put it on our board agenda as an update for care assessment. Okay, thank you.
I would like the closed captioning costs to be put on the regular board agenda, since that's what we're talking about. And that, I don't mind having stuff in the work session, but I think it gets lost sometimes because people watch the YouTube version of the board meeting because they think that, that's where the information is going to be, not necessarily listen to the work session. So I just like to roll that into that.
I think that's perfectly fine. So we'll move that to the 10th, from work session to the regular board meeting. We'll get an update on the care assessment process. Anything else?
Janet, I had a request from one of my colleagues about a report on the Equal Opportunity Schools Initiative. I don't know if we're going to do that. I'm not suggesting necessarily for this meeting, but sometime in the near future, if that's going to happen in the summer before next year.
I could provide you an email update to the board regarding that, and then you guys could decide if you wanted more of a formal presentation about that. We've done a couple presentations regarding that, but I could give you an update with data and some of that info that we have for the year.
It may not be timely for a full board presentation, so maybe an email would be.
I think an email with information that gives us more to chew on, and then we can decide when it might be proper or good timing for a work session item or a board update.
Sure.
And hopefully it's not a day-long project on your part. Right?
No, we should have that pretty readily available. That won't be difficult to pull
great.
together.
Thanks,
So,
Matt.
yep.
Thanks for raising that, Charlie. Anything else?
I just mentioned quickly, at our equity committee meeting, we had a discussion, and I guess I'd just like an update on our LGBTQ plus policy and the rollout of that. Just some things came up at that meeting that really maybe not everybody knows we have that policy and that it is our policy, and people need to follow that right now.
Yes.
Tomorrow, just because, there's some things in that policy where we've recognized that kids might be harmed if people are very cavalier about pronouns or maybe even outright antagonistic, and the bathroom usage as well. That maybe some things are happening where staff don't understand how important that is, and I just would like an update on how that's rolled out, and then what the expectation is for staff to follow that, and then maybe how we address it if folks. And not that I'm asking for a lot more emails, but I'm led to believe not a lot of people know it because we're not hearing anything. And this has got to be one of the most aggressive LGBTQ policies in the country, if not certainly in the state of Iowa. So I'm guessing that some folks who would, and I don't, again, want to welcome those, but I think people should know what the policy is, and then if they have an opportunity to comment to us or have questions as a board, we should be able to answer that.
I want to support JP because I did a lot of yelling at that equity committee meeting. So.
That Laura Gray put together a presentation for all of our building principals, and those presentations were supposed to be shared with the staff by December, and so we're counting on the fact that that's happened, but we certainly can circle back to make sure. The second piece of that, it's a tinier component, but one of those pieces is asking us to keep our students together for, if you remember, for that sex ed piece, and our teaching staff at the elementary level have not brought the students together before, and that's been worked on closely. Lindsay Schleckelbeer, Diane Schumacher, to provide an opportunity, as well as Laura Gray, to our 5th and 6th grade teachers, and I think now we're recognizing that we even need to bring in our 4th grade teachers for that, and that is happening during the month of March. And so there's some things underway PD-wise, but we can certainly circle back to figure out if those presentations have occurred in all of our attendance centers.
That'd be great. Thanks.
I just have one more, maybe a placeholder, may or may not happen, but at the March 10th meeting, it may be appropriate to discuss superintendent, depending on what happens in Green Bay. There's a 50-50 chance that we're going to lose our superintendent, so it might be just a public placeholder to address that if it
Yeah,
happens.
fair enough. I think one of the things, that, from a timing standpoint, it's a really great comment question. I think we had started thinking about the first meeting in April, having the next steps and how we're going to start planning out our search process. So,
I mean, maybe just, like I said, just a placeholder to, if Green Bay decides to go with Superintendent Murley as their candidate, then we may just want to address that publicly and have a placeholder for that.
perfectly fine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We'll start fielding questions immediately, right, what the process is, so as a placeholder, I think it's a great idea.
Yep, sounds good.
Or you haven't gotten questions so far?
Well, yes,
I
but
get them all the time, so.
there'll be more.
Yeah.
Anything else? Okay, is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.